Hmm. It's 9 minutes to 8. Good morning. You're watching Breakfast. Thanks for being with us. We're talking about Airbnb now, the website that lets you rent someone else's house for a holiday. Why? Because it's 10 years old. Morning, Ben.
Yeah, it's quite a transformation, isn't it? And the way it's reshaped the way that we maybe think about going on holiday. But crucially, for sort of the big hotel chains, it's really changed how they do business.
Yeah, I can't believe it's 10 years old.
I know, it's flown by, isn't it? And it all started with just a few airbeds in San Francisco. Yeah. We're talking about that website and an app that people, well, either love or loathe it, but they do agree it's pretty revolutionary. It's changed how we go on holiday. We're talking about Airbnb, of course. And it all started 10 years ago, in August of 2008. That's when its founders decided to take advantage of a lack of hotel rooms for a big political conference that was taking place in the US. And at the time, they took what then was a whopping 80 bookings. Well, 10 years on, and the site now lists more than 5 million flats and houses across 191 different countries. Now, as we said, if you're not familiar with the site, it basically lets you rent out a room or maybe your entire house to paying visitors. And on average, people can earn that, about £3,000 a year. So why do they do it? Well, we spoke to Annie, who rents out 3 rooms in her house in East London. She told us why.
We love it, basically. We have fantastic people who come to stay. It's a sort of cheap thing to stay in London in a lovely room, which is got an ensuite facility for £55 a night. We have 2 other rooms that are cheaper than that. We're quite busy and we meet fantastic people. People who come to stay with us are people who don't have often big incomes but are jolly interesting. So they are artists and academics and students and quite a lot of families who come to visit their children who live nearby.
So that's one story. Well, the site's clearly had a big impact on how we travel, but it's also hurt profits for traditional hotels and B&Bs. There are also worries over things like safety, whether they're paying the right taxes, and the impact that it can have on the local housing market, because in some cities, lots of houses or flats are being bought up and then rented out via the site. So what could it all mean? Let's speak to Pippa Jacks, who's a group editor at the Travel Trade Gazette, and with me this morning. Pippa, hiya. It's a really interesting one, this, isn't it? As Naga was saying, 10 years, it's flown by, but it's changed how we think about going away. And as I touched on at the beginning, some love it, some hate it. Who likes, who hates?
It is a little bit, as you say, love it or loathe it. I think when the Airbnb platform works well, it's fantastic. It offers some fantastic, unique places to stay, and that idea of homeliness and meeting the locals and all those things works great. But as you said, because it's sort of unregulated and there's sort of not a consistent, reliable provision of that accommodation, it can mean that it doesn't always live up to expectations. And you hear the scare stories about big parties being held and those sorts of things, bogus listings. So it's not perfect. And the traditional hotel industry feels that it's not fair that Airbnb is able to sort of be largely untaxed and unregulated.
Yeah, we'll talk about the hotel sort of response in a minute, but I mean, I suppose, you know, the big benefit of it is that you're staying in someone's house, so you get all the facilities, you know, kitchens, kettles, all that sort of thing, washing machines, and you often get like local insight. So they'll say, well, these are the bars I go to, these are the restaurants that I like in my local area, and it's that sort of personal touch. And you might say that's where hotels have failed, because they just became these huge organisations that were so impersonal, weren't they?
Very anonymous kind of experience. So the hotel industry has really responded to Airbnb and tried to learn from what Airbnb was offering so well. So we now see hotels trying to bring the local community into the lobby and create working spaces and organise tours with local artists and those sorts of things to try and bridge the gap, I suppose, between what Airbnb was offering and what the traditional hotel sector was offering.
And for the people that rent out their homes, and a lot of people do it in this country, for visitors coming here, they rent out a room or the entire house. There's money to be made, isn't there? But there's a big question over whether we should pay tax on that money.
There is. It has been tended to be up to the host to organise paying their tax and working out what they're liable for. But actually, the Treasury now is looking again at what you're allowed to earn as a homeowner. And from next April, we're expecting that instead of being able to earn up to £7,500 by renting out a second room, well, you'll be able to do it if you're renting out a second room, but not if you're renting out your entire home and basically running it as a holiday rental. So there's changes afoot which are going to make it less lucrative for you as a homeowner in the UK to be using it.
Yeah, and so big changes now. I mean, I suppose it's here to stay, 10 years this month, but and the two sort of coexist, don't they? Hotels will always have a place where you just want to go, stay quickly for the night and then leave again. But, you know, Airbnbs and that sort of model, very much here to stay.
I think so, and different travellers have different desires, and even different sorts of trips have different requirements. So I personally quite like being able to dial 0 and speak to somebody in reception who'll send me up a drink. But on another trip, maybe the Airbnb experience would work for me. But I'd always say that to be fully kind of protected and secure, you need to speak to a travel expert, a travel professional, particularly for big trips, special occasions. Do you perhaps want to take that risk of an Airbnb cancelling the day before you travel, which you don't get with a normal hotel?
Yeah, really interesting, isn't it? I can't believe it's 10 years. Pippa, thanks so much. Really nice to see you, Pippa Jacks there. More from me after 8. I'll see you very shortly.